Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be. This is another week with the Crotchety Old Men podcast. I'm your host today, Gary Smith, and joining me in the studio is my partners in crime. I call our engineer, but hey, he's actually a very good guy and retired executive, George Crumley. Top of the morning, Crumbs.
Top of the morning, Smitty. How we doing this day?
Oh man, we're doing great as always. We're great crotchety old men. And look here, we'd be remiss if we didn't say shout out to our main man, Paul PC Clemens. What up, though, PC?
Hey, what up, Doe? How's everybody? Doing pretty good, man. As I always say, I'm 6 feet above, which is as tall as I'm ever gonna get in this life, and you all know what I mean. So all is well here on this day.
That's great, PC. Well, as I've looking through some notes, I understand that we have some very phenomenal guests in the studio joining us this day. Man, I am so excited. I brought two notepads, so I'm hoping that everybody that's listening to this podcast today, you get your pencil. Make sure your pencil is sharp and have plenty of paper because I'm not going to spill the beans. PC, I'm going to pass it back to you, man. Introduce who we got up here in the studio for today, man.
Right on, brother. We got two dynamic brothers with a very interesting twist on their journey of life that I would like to expose to our audience today. We have Tony Owens, who is the co-founder and director of the Foundation for Educational Success. And we have his partner in crime, Reggie Beaty, who is also the co-founder and co-director of the Foundation for Educational Success. First thing I would like to ask you, gentlemen, you have very diverse backgrounds, which wouldn't necessarily lead to education. Tony, your background, you had a business degree, and Reggie, which I'm really interested in his story, has an aeronautical engineer and was a lieutenant colonel in the military. So tell me, gentlemen, what got you from the backgrounds that you all established and turned you to the educational realm?
Thank you. Let me go ahead and make sure I get this right. That's PC, Smitty, and Crumbs, right?
Yeah, yeah, that'll do. That'll do.
You got it right.
Good.
Here we go.
Well, PC, let me be sure to, first of all, thank you all for the invite. And when you first invited me, I can't come on and do this without my partner in crime. We've been doing this for over 25 years now on this same journey. So, and Paul said, well, we just need one. I said, well, it's going to feel like one sometimes because we've been working and doing this work so long together. We think from the same thoughts. And that's not to say that we don't agree to disagree at times, but we do know how to move on. So thank you, Paul, for having us here. And I won't call you one of my mentors because we know where that word came from. But a younger guy told me one time, you should be referred to as a jegna. A jegna. And that's one who's honest. That's one who's pure. That's one who respects and loves his community. So to you and Gary, we say thank you. My journey, I would have to say a calling because I had no interest. I had no knowledge of being in education, but someone bumped into me and they liked the way that the work that I was doing at the time. They wondered how I was able to handle situations a certain way and other people were not able to handle that situation. So a young lady told me about an organization at the time that was called Exodus, and it grew to cities and schools, and it's now communities and schools. And that's where I started my journey, working with alternative, all those kids that everybody else had given up on, all those people that just thought they wasn't worth the time. And that started my journey, and that's where I stayed with Exodus, cities and schools, communities and schools. Now with my partner in crime, Reggie, and I met in that work. And we decided we've been doing it for others for long enough now. Let's do it for ourselves. So we pulled out over 16 years ago. And here we've been in this struggle up until this day together. So that started my path. You'll hear more about how we stayed the course.
Reg.
Thank you so very much. I I tend to think that when I think about this journey, and I'm so, well, first of all, as Tony mentioned, thank you all for allowing us to be on here. And when I think about from whence I came, and I know some of that is in my bio, but just in terms of how did we get here, how did I personally get here, I was raised in a single mother home with 5 kids in one of the worst neighborhoods. Some of you all probably know of it, Bankhead Court here in Atlanta, Georgia. And as a result of that, you know, never seeing my father, understanding the plight in my community of a community that's impoverished, everybody's on welfare, crime ridden, and etc. I found myself at age 13, I was expelled. Well, actually 14, I was expelled from all schools in Atlanta, Georgia, for something that I'm not proud of. But I was expelled, and when you found a 14, 15, or a young person expelled from school, what options do you have except for the street? And so when I understand and see what's going on in our communities, especially with our Black boys, I understand sometimes good people make bad decisions. And I, for one, made a bad decision that I started over 2 years a life of crime. And that included the drugs and selling drugs and breaking into homes and armed robbery, burglary, you name it. And so the organization that I ended up coming back running actually saved my life. And I want to talk about the other young men. And there's a book written about my life called The Last Dropout. And then Tony and I wrote another book about my life that we wrote together called Thug Life to Triumphant Life. And so that led me, after being in the streets for 2 years and in and out of the juvenile justice system, and knowing how I like to say, I helped kill my mother. I don't mean literally, but when your youngest son is in the streets and you don't know where he's coming from, and I understand mothers who are serious and parents who don't know what their young siblings, or not their siblings, but their kids are doing in the streets, it makes me think about what I did and call it that stress. So long story short, someone saved my life. A Black man saved my life, came into my life and came in the streets. And I ended up putting down my 22 and my 38 at 16 years old after being in the streets for 2 years. I ended up going back to school, getting a GED, which is not the traditional route, but that most kids should take. And as a result, they just put me on a path to success, I like to call it, but it's not because of me. It's because of mentors, or we like to call it objectives. It's because of people and Black men who got in my life at an early age, along with another gentleman. And the rest has been history. And from that, I went in the military, retired as a lieutenant colonel on my way to what we call the War College, and made a decision that to honor my mother, who had just passed a year before, that I needed to get back out here and try to change the lives and the path of so many young men that are faced with some of the struggles that I faced, and that I had something to offer. And so that led me, instead of getting directly into I had license in insurance, license in real estate. I had my 6 Series license, and I knew I wanted to make a whole lot of money. But that changed when I saw the path that was happening. And I realized that I too could be part of that change. And so that led me to a non-traditional way of getting into education. And Tony and I have been business partners and in this space, as he said, over 20 years, but full time the last 16 years or so.
Okay, so let's talk about what the foundation for educational success is.
I started off and then pass it over to Reggie, and we like to say the name of our organization speaks for what any organization has to do. First, you have to build a firm foundation for anything to exist on. So we talk about that foundation for educational success. We look at it from a point of it being success sits on a 3-legged stool. So success is on top. You got one leg that we call the student. You got another leg that we call the parent. And you got that other leg that we call the educator. And if all 3 of those legs are not as equally as strong, that stool is not going to be able to stand. So we build our foundation, and our work is based on working with those 3 entities, not the curriculum part of it, but the social emotional learning part of it, the people part, the non-cognitive part. What are those non-cognitive skills that people need and schools need in order to exist? So when we talk about that 3-legged stool, I'll go ahead and let Reggie pick it up from here.
when we think about this work, if you think of any organization, and I know George and others, you all have been in large operations. When you think about any organization, any successful organization, yes, it's about the bottom line, but you have to create a high-performing culture and climate. In any environment, successful environment, the more successful, the higher the culture and the climate, meaning that if people feel good about where they are, where they're working, if people are coming to school and feel like they belong and they're part of that, then they're going to be successful as well. But you create that environment before you can even get to the product, before you can even get to, in this case, school. And so Tony and I made that choice, and our tagline is, how do we get young people turned to living so they can get turned on to learning? Because if I feel good and I know what I'm in school for, if I understand at the end of this road, if I don't provide you a roadmap to success, then you can't expect young people to get on that journey. We don't take vacations and trips without having a roadmap. And so our perspective is, if we can provide a roadmap for teachers and educators to understand the value add, that your first step is building that relationship. Relationships drives everything. And if I feel comfortable with that relationship with an educator, with a teacher, then I feel like I belong. And then I can create that healthy environment. Then I can get to whatever it is I'm teaching. But I first have to build that relationship. I first have to get you turned on to living, to understand. There's a reason you're taking all these math classes, because then I understand this is about dollars, cents. And I don't mean CENTS. I'm talking about dollars, money, that I understand why I'm in school. I'm in school not just to get a paycheck. It's in school to cause myself to create an environment of all those things I want to have, what I want to do, and what I want to be. And if you get young people thinking differently, then they're in for the long game, as opposed to what we see in some of our communities around that short game.
Now, you know what? That is one heck of a concept. So, being that said, Reggie, let me ask you this question. Is culture and climate as important as curriculum and instruction?
Well, obviously I'm saying, if you ask any educator, they'll tell you yes. But I would venture to say, when we look at school improvement plans, you have 95% focus on curriculum and instruction. And we understand that's the crux of why you go to school, teaching and learning. However, if you're not intentional about creating that high-performing culture and climate at the school, in the building, in the classroom, as well as in the home, beyond just feeding your children and clothing, you got to create that same culture and climate. So it is a college-going culture, if that's what you want. It is an understanding that I'm turned on to living, that I know my purpose of going to school. And so the obvious answer for us is yes, and that's our mantra. Culture and climate is as important as curriculum and instruction. And educators will tell you yes, but my follow-up is always, show me the evidence. Show me the evidence. And if we don't see the evidence, then in many cases, we think that you're playing lip service to this whole adage around being intentional of creating a high-performing culture and climate.
Well, actually, the evidence is in the word itself. If you look at the etymology of the word education, it's a Latin root word, educere, which means to learn from within and go out. Okay. And what I've noticed in educational circumstances, they're teaching you something for you to regurgitate back and not necessarily go within you and pull that out. Talk about that, if you will, for a moment.
Paul, it's only one way to look at that for us. We're putting the cart before the horse. We're teaching you that you got to have an education, but we're not teaching you why you should have an education. And the why is what makes you hungry for it. So we say, let's flip that around. And y'all heard that old adage. If you ever looked at a picture with a horse behind the cart and trying to push it with his nose, he may get it to move a little bit, but he's not going to get it to move much. So when you put that horse right, which is living, like Reggie talked about, when you put that living, they know why I'm coming to school. I know what I'm studying. I need to know that I'm going to be an electrician. Nothing wrong with that. You make a lot of money. I need to know that I'm going to be a plumber. I need to know that I'm going to be HVAC, so I know I need to know these numbers. And it's a reason for the learning. If you don't have a reason for the learning, that's where we start losing our black boys. They're looking at this thing they don't mind talking about this conversation about money. If I can't get to this thing called money through this thing called education, why am I doing it? If I can't get to this thing called money because lack of education, why am I doing it? Because it don't look like money is an equation or a factor in this equation. It don't look like education is the key factor. Let me make sure I get that right, because money needs to be at the forefront. Reggie and I work with several different boys groups around the nation, and they get excited to hear two black men standing in front of them. And the first thing we tell them about, we don't have no problem with talking to y'all about money, y'all. They sit up, Gary. They sit up and say, okay, these guys might be talking about something. We don't have any problem talking to you all about. Ain't nothing wrong with making money. We've been talking about money is the root. We've been taught to think money is the root of all evil. And that's a mentality that makes you broke. That's a mentality that keeps you from wanting this thing called education. So our biggest thing, and Reggie, he'll talk, he knows the story of the young people that we work with. You know, you're talking about a fatherless child, a fatherless young man, more importantly. Where does the image come from to tell him, hey, look, son, you got to get your hands dirty, do something. You got to know how to change this tire before you can learn how to drive. You know, me and Reggie had these conversations. He always say all the time, he's glad that he met my dad before he passed, because he said, you tell some hell of a stories about your dad. And he seemed like he was a tyrant. He didn't take no stuff. I said, you know, as I grew up and I figured it out, it wasn't that he was a tyrant, but he took a pride in making sure that his boys became men. He took pride in making sure that it's one thing for me to let you drive the car, but if you can't put gas in it and you can't keep it clean and all these things, and then he give you that car for 45 minutes, then he take off in it. I said, I think I've been tricked, but then I found out, no, I ain't get tricked. I learned the lesson that I need to learn. I got to know how to take care, and I got to know, and I know I'm probably going off cuff, but the question was, you get that education. How do you get that education piece for our young men and our young women to make sure that they understand I'm learning for a reason. I'm learning for a reason. Reggie like to say this, he has this thing with, you know, A money makes A money. F money makes F money. So why do you think that all these young people that go to school and they do these great things academically, and you laughing at them right now, but they're eventually going to be your boss somewhere because they're making good grades and they understand and they learn this thing about the importance.
Man, I'm telling you, that's breaking it down, gentlemen, because a feast will make you laugh and wine will make you merry, but money answers all things. And that's from a scripture of Ecclesiastes 10:19, one of my most favorite ones. Now, I can go on and on, but then we're not here to talk about scriptures today, but man, you guys are preaching and teaching. And so I'm going to get out your way because I want you to continue to flow. And Reggie, I want to toss this one to you because so often our young men miss out on that discipline, by not having a father in the household. And Reggie, as you was telling your story, I'm just sitting here thinking, man, is this guy reading my bio or what have you? Because without going into a whole lot of detail, I've traveled that same path that you had. And it was grace of God that I too ended up into the military, where it taught me discipline, the discipline that I hadn't earned on my own. So my question to you is that, did the military have anything to do in terms of not only just the discipline, but directing you or correcting you into a way that you want to go? Or was that just somewhat of a byproduct, if you will? You understand my question?
I think I definitely do. I think that when I reflect back and I think about discipline, someone once asked me this question, and I know it's not specifically related to education, but indirectly it is. Someone once asked me the question, which one was the greatest challenge, problem to our community? Was it slavery or the absence of the black man in the house? And I said, pick your evil, pick your poison. They both were horrific. They both are horrific. And we're still saying the outline of that. When you see a black boy, in my case, you mentioned discipline, Smitty. My thing is, when I look back, and my mother did everything she possibly could, but we all know eventually, somewhere, a boy needs a man in his life to guide him on that path, that journey. A mother can do all she can do in nurturing and etc. But eventually, your older brothers become the men in your life, and they're only 3 and 4 or 5 years older than you. Then they're trying to paint their own path. So for me, when I listen to men, and as a father myself, it's my greatest joy. But just to digress just a little bit, when I think about discipline, the streets got me. But I believe if I had that man, that role model, that father who not only put fear in my life, but not fear that I'm scared of him, but understanding that, man, I don't want to fail my father, and my father is guiding me. And so regardless of whether or not parenting has never been, it's always meant to be a two-person sport. And so when you find one parent trying to do it by themselves, regardless if they're together. And so my discipline, first of all, was very undisciplined in the streets. And then when I got a chance to go off to college and I started allowing myself to be around like-minded people, I started changing my behavior. I started acting like people in Rome. I'm not saying that my community was bad. It's just that we had no way forward in many of us. And when we see the number of people dropping out of schools, and so the military honed that. I think I had leadership because I was the leader, what we called the 4 little boys when we were doing all that dirt. The military helped shape that. ROTC in college helped shape that. And that journey just started to get honed in, that I realized that I could still be successful in doing the things I needed to do. And so the military was my foundation to that discipline that allowed me to go on to run other large organizations and to do all those other things, because it allowed me that creativity, but it allowed me that structure. And contrary to popular belief, the military isn't as robotic as people think. It actually is very entrepreneurial in allowing commanders and senior leaders to make those decisions. So it definitely was my foundation when I think about discipline and I think about structure that I didn't have, that Tony had, just because he had that father in his life that shaped him and caused him to be successful. And so we took 2 different journeys to end up at the same, ultimate to the same place. But I definitely pray and hope that no one takes the journey that I had to take to find my way, as opposed to what Tony had to do. And now, we're business partners, we're boys. And so short answer, Smitty, yes, the military was instrumental, but yet I wish my journey had taken a different route. I don't wish it had taken a different route. I wish more young men take the journey that Tony took, as opposed to how I ended up getting there.
Well spoken, well said. Appreciate it. All right. So I guess that leads me to another question there. Recently Governor DeSantis denied Black Studies programs and the curriculum in Florida schools, as I understand it. In your opinion, how does that impact students? And then either one of you, that's a question that's open. Either one of you can take that.
Well, for me, I'll use an old analogy that I was taught by one of my jugglers, Dave Lewis. He used to tell a story about if somebody goes on a vacation, they have a real good time, they take a whole bunch of pictures and they put that photo album together, and it's precious, and they got 1,000 pictures in it. And you're sitting at your home, and they invite you over to look at those pictures. You may do it out of courtesy, but you already know that there's not one image of you in the book. So your interest does not really become looking at their vacation pictures, because you know you're not in there. So you already know you're not in there while you handing this to me. So when you talk about taking Black Studies out of school, if I already know I'm not in there, why would you do that to me? I already know that you're going to take that and you want to deny me access to it. And then that's a double-edged sword too, because are they taking something out that's really going to hurt us? Are they taking some stuff out that we really, it's hard for me to word this, but that wasn't truthful when you talk about true Black history? So does it hurt us, or does it push us to a place where we start saying, we got to be responsible? We got to be responsible for us. We got to take on that responsibility of teaching our history and making sure that our kids know who we are prior to slavery, the kings and the queens that we grew out of. Because slavery was hundreds, maybe thousands of years after our kingship and our queenships. But you have to know that, and how much of that was actually really being taught in African American studies anyway. So that's my take on it. But I think it's a double-edged sword. It pushes you to a point where you got to take the responsibility. I need to know who Imhotep was. I need to know about the pyramids, the Sphinx. I need to know all these things. If they were not teaching, and they don't even teach that stuff at a surface level.
Tony talks about this, and that's whenever we're on our long rides for 10, 12 hours, these are the type of conversations that we have, and iron sharpens iron. And it goes back to how do this thing called self-efficacy. If we don't start thinking self-efficacy, in our own communities and for ourselves, for our own children, and it really is a belief in his or her own capacity. But if I become dependent of someone telling my story, like Tony just said, then that story is not going to be told by us, for us. And what are you afraid of when I think about Governor Santos? What are you afraid of? If it's part of history, then let's tell it the real truth, the way it should be told. And see, I think what people have done is they politicize things like critical race theory and we're teaching hate and etc. No, let's tell it like it is. We're not, let's go out and let's all of a sudden start destroying people and destroying property. No, let's understand. And so what is it that you're afraid of, Governor? That you're afraid to tell the truth about what happened? If we're going to talk about that other part of history, then tell this part of history as well. But if you're not going to tell it, which we can't mandate, policymakers are making those decisions, but we have a responsibility to tell our own history so our kids can then tell their kids. But what we're starting to see is starting to be minimized. It's starting to water down. And if we don't know from whence we came, and if kids don't know what Jim Crow law means, if we don't understand what sharecroppers meant, if we don't understand that, the plight that we've had, if we don't understand what the civil rights movement meant, if we don't understand all of that, then that history is going to go away. And then the people not only not knowing, when you say we're free to go where? Free to do what? Freedom where? Where am I going? All you did is took the physical shackles off me, but yet where? But if we don't understand historically that perspective, then we're never going to understand from how far we need to go. And then we have to teach this whole adage around black on black crime. People have taught us this. We're kind, nice people. This didn't come from us. Look how we were torn apart in our communities, and you take my language, and you take my woman, you take my kids. And so, yes, I'm adamant about it, but I'm not adamant about going out and causing any physical revenge on anyone. But I do want, yes, I understand that you're not going to give me 40 acres and a mule. I don't want a mule. Give me 40 acres and a tractor. That's an adage that, many have said, and it's probably not going to happen since I know you haven't done it all these years. Then self-efficacy, self-preservation, teaching our own people this history in our own homes. We have that responsibility to do so. And these are the kind of conversations that are raw. It may not feel comfortable to you, but now walk in our shoes to understand the wrong that's been done to us, and let's do something about it.
That both of you brothers raise a good point. I like Tony's point of view in terms of where the beginning started, and the reason why DeSantis is doing what he's doing is because if the story is told correctly, it is going to dim the light of white supremacy. I mean, let's just put it on the table, gentlemen. And these days and times, white supremacy is being dimmed anyway because of the population explosion amongst people of color. So the only thing that they have to do is to narrate the story. Now, Reggie, I like the concept that you have about teaching our own people, but we have to make sure we got to teach our own people from where we began and not where slavery started, because that's not where we began. And so I'd like to talk about the idea of critical race theory, and we've touched upon it for a moment. But what boggles my mind is how can you have a critical race theory when stuff has already happened? That's no longer a theory. You know what I'm trying to say? And so obviously to me they're trying to change the story around, and I think it's incumbent upon us to have cadres, to have our own schools and academies and whatnot, because we cannot depend on a person who has oppressed us to give us anything to subdue him. That's not going to ever happen. You want to talk about that?
And when you think about critical race theory, Paul, I think about it in the format of just like you said, it can't be a theory if it's already happened. But how much of that truth that you want to actually expose? So we have to look at all the different labels that Black history has been given over the years. First we had a Black History Day, then we had a Black History Week. And ironically, Black History Month for this year starts tomorrow. The critical race theory piece is another ploy to take your eyes off the prize. It's another name that has been given, much like Negro, Black, whatever the names have always been given to divert your attention away from it. So the critical race theory, for me, critical race theory is taking down all these civil rights statues, because now you get a chance to forget about your history. I say leave them up, because now you got to walk up to it and you got to face it. Only thing I say differently, put the truth up under that narrative of that statue, because that's your history. We don't want you to take it down. That's America's history. I mean, we can't deny that, but we don't want to put a label on it that diverts your attention, and we don't get to the real issue, which is, once again, why are we not teaching ourselves these things that we need to know? Why hasn't a young man, before they reach the 9th grade, read The Miseducation of the Negro? If that book has not been read by more it's not been read by more than it has. That's one of my greatest reads right there, because it talks about issues that we're facing right now. It talks about the fact that, a rally or a protest without a purpose is a waste of time. You go to a protest, you go to a rally, and we had the rah, 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 and somebody walk up to one of the participants and simply ask them, what's your ask? What's your ask? And if we can't, in a uniform format, articulate what our ask is. If we got 100 people at a rally and they asked everybody that same question, 99 of them should have the same answer. But that's not the case. So, I mean, the critical race theory is another, for me, it's a diversion. And I know me and Reggie do a real horrible job of answering the direct question, because we want to get our own points in sometimes. But for me, I think critical race theory is just another thing to take our eyes off the prize.
You summed that up really, really well. But what I'd like to do is, in view of all of these things that we just got finished talking about, you had put in context that your program has a 3-pronged approach, or a 3-legged stool, if you will. So let's talk about how you approach each one: the parent, the school, and the student.
So we're going to piggyback on this. I'm going to start off with the school and the parent, and then Tony can come back and talk about a resource that we developed that focused directly on the whole thing around the whole child, and how we address that through another resource we developed. So first of all, just in brief, I'm going to be brief this time. The first thing we do is we go into schools and we do an assessment. Anybody ought to do an inventory assessment on the culture and climate. And we have an intentional research-based process that we go into school, and in a matter of a day and a half, we can tell you what the culture and climate of a school, of a nonprofit, of any organization. We have a step-by-step process that allows us to assess. And then from that, we've developed what we call a profile, that we're able to give you a profile on the culture and climate. Just like academics, how many kids graduated, how many passed these type of tests. If we go around looking at that culture and climate, what's the look, what's the feel? What are those relationships inside the building? From the beginning of the day to the end of the day, what are the expectations? What are those norms? What are those standard operating procedures from the beginning to the end of the day? And if they're being implemented with fidelity, or are you allowing things to get out of hand? So we have a deliberate process for assessing and then providing feedback of a profile to the administrator, and then ultimately our recommendations on how you can create that high-performing culture and climate. Then part two of that stool, or the second leg of that stool, deals with the parent. We have a resource, regardless of your socioeconomic, regardless of your education attainment, we have a resource that's research-based, that's very intentional, that is in both English and Spanish, that allows parents to go in and see, what do I need to do to build a high-performing culture and climate in my home beyond feeding? And so again, that's a deliberate, intentional way that will allow parents to sign on to a resource. And we've been very fortunate in that we've been supported by other organizations, and school systems are using it to train them and work with their parents on how to create a high-performing culture and climate. Educational culture and climate in the home. And so without you even having to go to the school. So those are the two of the legs. And then Tony, if you could talk briefly about the third leg.
But the third leg is one of the pride and joys, because we know this is where we get the opportunity to interact directly with those young people around, what am I going to do with my life? And we call that faces of change. And we ask young people when we're working with them, who am I? Where am I going? And how will I get there? And that all feeds off what we start off with, is the prayer of serenity. God grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So we say you first must have serenity. Wherever you are, we got you right now. Forget about your past, forget about anything that ever happened, because we want to move from this point to success. We want to move from this point to showing you how to make money. We want to move from this point to wealth. And we have those conversations with them. But not only have those conversations, we provide what we like to call our timeline. So they're working with their past, dealing with all those decisions that they made in their past. They create a SWOT chart for themselves. When I say they, I'm talking about the young people. From there, they move on to the present. What am I doing right now that's going to impact my success? What are my goals? And we say goals are either defined as anything I can have, do, or be. We try to keep it that simple. Tell me what you want to have. And they'll tell you a nice house, a nice car, and all those things. Tell me what you want to do. They'll start talking about travel. If they don't talk about it, we'll talk about some of our travel. And then we say, what is it that you really want to be? But we truly understand that first you got to be something before you have anything, and before you can actually go and do all those things that you talked about. So we work with them through that whole process around not just traditional goal setting, but let's really talk about it. Let's start talking about those dollars and cents like Reggie talked about earlier. We have a conversation with them about paying bills. If they don't come from an environment where they know you got this whole row of bills that you have to pay, and at the bottom of that, you still got to pay your deal with Uncle Sam. So when you start talking about how much money you're going to make and to live that type of lifestyle, we have that real upfront conversation with them. And then we talk to them about, once you get there, what are you going to do to reach back to bring others along? So that's getting to that wisdom stage. So we go back to that serenity, that courage, and that wisdom. And that's our three-legged stool. The third leg first must be that kid. And I think, just personally for me, Paul, going back to my work that I've been doing over 30 years with education, I started out and I had an opportunity to run an alternative school, much like the school that Reggie graduated from, but it was in a different time and place. And I think the only reason they gave me the opportunity to do that, because they knew I wasn't scared of the kids. I wasn't scared of the kids. We're going to have a real upfront, close conversation about why you're here and what you want to do. And first of all, I have to let you know it's only one boss here. So don't worry about that. I got that covered. And kids gravitate to that. When you talk about discipline, I know earlier you asked Reggie about discipline, but me and Reggie have come to find out, and you all know just as well, and letting them go get away with a whole bunch of stuff. And we've learned that even in our settings, when we have our large group assemblies around Faces of Change, and most of the time we do it with just a group of about 150 to 200 just young men, and all the teachers want to stand around and they want to stand guard and they want to tell them how to act. And me and Reggie just take that route and say, y'all ain't got to worry about that. We got that, because we're going to respect them like they're going to respect us. And we're going to demand that respect. And it's just a process you have to take young men through, because you got to know what's going on inside their head. They're going to play you as long as you let them play you. And once you take that play away from them, now you can start feeding into the knowledge that they need.
Tony, if I could, Paul, I just want to make just one comment on top of what Tony, you asked the question about our process. I just want to make sure you understand. Tony and I are not just two people who are trying to save the world. We're actually about train the trainer. So everything that we're talking about, we train others to do what we know needs to be done. And so when we go in and we're training principals and educators and teachers, and then to build capacity, we're training district people on parent liaisons on how to work with their parents, how to engage them. We're training others on how to build a relationship with teachers, with students. And so everything he's talking about is in a train-the-trainer model as opposed to us training. We don't just work. We love working with young people ourselves, and we do some of that, but we realize that the heart is huge. And so we're training others to do what we're talking about doing.
So how do you measure what your completed goals are?
All right, so when we think about, and I'll take the first two. When you think about, well, I'll take all three and wrap them all together. And Tony, you can clean it up. But the first part is we have a metric that we actually use that to assess, just like going in to assess the success, the challenges in a school. On a monthly basis, we're able to come back in and give you an updated assessment. And by the end of the school year, you should have less disruptions. You should have better attendance. And at the end of the day, we're measuring what I call the A-list. If the academics are not improving, then overall, we're not doing what we need to do as an entity. If there are not more family parent engagement or more involved with more parental involvement, then we're measuring, they're assessing and measuring their involvement, their engagement. And then finally, attendance. I call it 3A, academics, attendance, and we like to say behavior, but we just like to say attitude. So that comes to the 3A. And schools are measuring those things all the time. And if you can't come back and say how it's being improved, now, it doesn't happen right away because you didn't get into this overnight. But the process by following and due diligence and implement with fidelity allowed you after a couple of years. And then we say after 2 years, if you haven't fired us, then you're not doing your job. We're not doing our job. So it should take 2 years. In year 2, if you haven't seen remarkable changes, then we're not doing what we need to do. And we tell people, you should fire us after a couple of years. In other words, that means we've done what we need to do to help you and build that capacity for you to continue with the work that we've started, that now we're training you on how to continue developing those processes. Tony, anything missed out of that you want to add?
No, sir. Just want to make sure we mention that Faces of Change and the Parent Tool actually are online curriculums that we've created. A parent can go in and go through this process of what do you need to do to make sure your child is successful in school. Now, at school, what do I need to be doing in my in-home environment? So we talk about these 11 research-based strategies, and the parents have a real simple process of going through it. They can pull it up on their phone, their iPad, their computer, and they can log in and go through this whole process that we call using the Parent Tool. And Faces of Change, much like the Parent Tool, is an online resource, just like we go out and do the workshops in those large assemblies. But the lead behind is do it for yourself. Take control of your life. Go through this process that we call Faces of Change, and you can do it online. It's per subscription, per school. So that's the only thing I would say, Rick.
Boy, I just want to applaud both of you brothers, man. This has been some good stuff. I mean, I don't know any other podcast that we've had recently that's basically talked about what the actual answers are, because the government thinks that the answer to everything is just throw money at it. And what you guys have clearly said is it's family. You gotta start with the family. You gotta start at home, and that's the answer. Okay, it ain't all these other community programs. It's the family. You've got to figure out how to get the family unit working together. And you guys have a plan to do just that. You kind of touched upon it as far as, how you're expanding. You're saying that you're doing the trainer to trainer. Are there any other tools that you're using to expand this, not just from, in Georgia, or maybe you can talk about, are you in Georgia? Are you in other states? I mean, how is it? How is the program expanding?
We've had opportunity pre-COVID. We were working in 6 other states outside of Georgia. So when Reggie talks about that 12-hour windshield time that we spend together, most of the time we're driving because we were carrying material. We were taking training, equipment, and all this type of stuff. Most of the time we drove. But now we just drive because we feel like it's the right thing to do. We can see the country, and we Crotchety Old Men just as well. We have to make a lot of restroom break stops. So we don't want to be in a place where we don't have total control of which times we stop. So, but to answer your question, we're just coming back to Georgia actually, because our identity was so deep in the organizations that we worked with in the past that every time they saw us, they saw that old organization. So we had to spread out and go to other states until that. I don't want to say that reputation wore off, but that connection with that organization kind of wore off, because every time we walked into a building, we were known to be with that former organization, and they were looking for us to do the same thing for them that organization was doing. So no, we've spread. We are the co-founder and the president, but we also have a host of consultants that we've been able to get with people that have spent illustrious careers in education, but they're not traditional educators. They know our work. We've done some work for them, and now they're working with us as consultants. I'd say over 15 to 16 consultants. Just depends on who's available at the time. So we don't try to do it all. We got a school we had a school district we started with about 4 years ago already. I won't say which one, but they gave us all 67 of their schools. So we had to call in all 15 of those consultants, and me and Reggie had to just kind of be the supervisor, just watch the work. So they actually had to go in and do the assessments, and they had to actually go in and do the observations based on a template that we gave everybody, so it wouldn't be swayed based on their opinion. But we have consultants. We do work on building capacity. That's one of the things that I learned from Reggie's background. He always talks about structure and capacity. How do we grow this? How do we create this process where it's not always the Reggie and Tony show, but we have other people that are doing the work as well. So we're definitely, George, and thank you for that question. We're definitely creating capacity because we can't do it all. And one of the things we'll go ahead and say it, we're kind of tough on who we bring in, because we have a reputation that we've already made the first impression, and we think we do that well. But your reputation comes after that first impression. What do you do after you made that impression? So we're kind of tough on who we bring in, because if they don't look, sound, and smell like Foundation for Education Success, we bid them farewell.
Gentlemen, I tell you, I wish we could continue on and on and on, brothers, because you all have certainly enlightened us here at the Crotchety Old Men podcast. I got to believe within my spirit, man, that you certainly have touched some listeners and those who tune in to our podcast. And in summarizing everything for today's episode, gentlemen, in parting here, man, it's so much that you've shared, though. What one thing that, as a listener, as we begin to wrap up here today, what is the most salient thought or principle, what have you, that you would want people to walk away from this podcast, from hearing this podcast?
I'll go first, and I guess for me, the work that we do is kind of near and dear to us, because we know if you don't get these culture and climate in these schools right, if you don't get the kids to thinking about their future based on being okay to have a conversation about money, and if you don't get these parents to understand why education is in place, it's not a babysitting service, it's not somewhere where you get a break for 8 hours. If we don't bring those three entities together, let me tell you who's going to suffer the most. And I'll let you know, PC, Crum, Smitty, Black communities are going to suffer tremendously, because when you got a school that if a teacher's out, a substitute looks at that particular school and say, I ain't going over there. And they're having a hard time because not only can't they get substitutes, but the quality of the teachers that they're getting. Teachers are making choices not to go to certain schools. And guess what schools they're making those choices not to go to? Failing schools, schools where there's crime, school where it has a toxic learning environment. If I just came out of college and I got to make a choice from going to a school that's happy, upbeat, and everything is in place, it's clean, the culture and climate is right, and going to, for the lack of a better word, a school in the hood where they fighting every day, restroom barely work, toilet tissue not in the bathrooms, writing on the walls. I'm going to that other school, y'all. It's simple as that. I'm going to that school where it's going to be easy because you don't pay me combat pay. So we keep in mind that all the people that's going to hurt the most when this stuff really comes down, when the numbers really come out, Gary, around teacher shortage, when the real numbers come out, people are not running the education anymore. So when we start looking at those classroom sizes growing, because you used to have 8 teachers, now you're down to 4, but you got the same amount of kids. So what do you do with those classrooms? You put them all together. So my concern comes down at the end of the day, PC, I would say, who's going to hurt the most if we don't get education right?
How does somebody get in touch with you guys for your service? Give us some direction on that.
Well,
Tony, if you would, Tony, add that to the chat. Tony, if you would, could you add that to the chat? But and if that's good enough, PC will put that information on the chat. The one thing I will say is,
but I'd like for you. Well, hold on. I'd like for you guys to say it. So if there's anybody in the audience that needs your services, they'd have a handle on how to get in touch with you guys.
Okay, so that's Reggie, Reggie @ and I'll spell this phonetically: T is in Tom, H is in Harry, E is in Edward, F is in Frank, F is in Frida, E is in Edward, S is in Sam.com. That stands for Reggie at the Foundation for Educational Success. And the only thing with Tony, just take the Reggie off and just put Tony at THEFFES.com. And you can reach out to us. Tony's phone number directly, 404-401-2232. And mine's is 678-557-7306. And my concluding comment is that the zip code should not determine how successful you're going to be. It just should not determine school success. But the research is out there that says if you live in these zip codes, then your school is not as good of a quality as other zip codes. And that's unfair, it's sad, but yet I always tell principals, ask yourself, an educator, would you want your own child to attend the school where you work at? And if the answer to that is no, then we have a lot of work to do. And then my last comment, as I started, this is about our children. This is about our children. Fathers, step up. Black fathers, step up. Black men, step up, whether it's your biological child or not. We need you. Educators need you, but our kids need you more. And we know. And so I always end with that, and that is, let's get kids turned on to living so they can get turned on to learning.
Amen, amen, amen. Well, gentlemen, I want to say again, thank you. Thank you so much for coming on the show today, sharing the wisdom and knowledge and understanding of where we need to be as a people, as a community, and certainly as a race. And I want to just really thank you for that. And so we like to say on the Crotchety Old Men show that if you didn't know, now you know.
Peace, brothers. Take care.
Peace, brothers. Appreciate you. Appreciate everything.
The closing word for today is your value does not decrease based upon someone else's inability to see your worth. Until we meet again. Peace.
This is Dr. Paul Clemens with the Crotchety Old Men podcast. If you're interested in financial tools to build wealth, and you're interested in ways to maximize your health through holistic alternatives, then you are just the audience that we're looking for. Tune in each week, every Thursday, to the Crotchety Old Men podcast, where George Crumley, Gary Smith, and I offer you in-depth discussions on health and wealth. Subscribe to the Crotchety Old Men podcast on Google, Spotify, Apple, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your favorite podcast.